Sometimes ghosts don't haunt places, they haunt uniforms. What would you do if the man you forgot turned out to be the one who once saved your life? Let us know in the comment section below. And make sure you're subscribed for more stories that bring hidden heroes into the light. Rick Benjamin never said much. He didn't need to. Each morning at 400 sharp, he pushed open the metal maintenance gate behind the west perimeter of Fort Hawthorne and started sweeping. Not the kind of sweeping that needed doing. No, this was more ritual than requirement. The dust would come back, the sidewalk grime would reappear with every gust of wind and every boot that marched across it, but Rick still swept like it mattered, like the concrete meant something. He moved with a quiet discipline that unnerved some of the younger privates. He had that posture, back straight, shoulders set, hands calloused but methodical. Something about him just didn't match the faded orange maintenance vest draped over his shoulders. That vest said nobody, but everything else, the way he watched, the way he paused before the flag was raised, the way he nodded at the posted guards, said something very different. Privates joked about him, Old Man Mop they called him, Sweeper Ghost, and sometimes worse. They didn't know his name because Rick never offered it. He never corrected anyone. He just swept. Until the day General Raymond Colton stepped out of a black Suburban with 2 aides flanking him and saw the old man's face. The general froze. His hand, still hovering mid-salute toward the flagpole, stayed in the air too long. His eyes squinted like he'd just glimpsed a ghost. "Is it really you?" he muttered, not loudly, not to anyone in particular. But the words weren't casual. They cracked the silence like a dropped rifle in a crowded barracks. The young soldiers near the gate looked up. The ones who'd been walking past the old man for months without a second glance suddenly studied him like a riddle they never knew needed solving. But Rick didn't answer. Not yet. He just dipped his broom down and swept another long line of dust off the concrete. 1 pass, 2 passes, slow, precise. Then, without raising his head, he spoke for the first time anyone could remember in years. "You finally outranked me, Ray." The general didn't smile, didn't blink. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. And maybe, in some ways, he had. It was only later, after the tension cooled and the aides had been waved off, that Rick Benjamin finally stood upright and turned to face the man now wearing 4 stars on each shoulder. "Been a long time since Bravo Echo days," Rick said, brushing the dust off his vest. "Didn't think anyone still remembered." "Damn right I remember," Colton said. "I carried your picture around in my breast pocket for 10 years. We thought you were dead, Rick. You never came back." Rick didn't flinch, didn't explain. He just looked over at the motor pool and then the distant barracks as if assessing troop formation like he used to do without being asked. "Never left," he said quietly. The next hour blurred into whispered conversation between 2 men who once faced fire together. Colton asked questions, some quiet, some sharp-edged. Rick answered in fragments, never quite giving a full story, but enough for the general to piece together something close to the truth. And nearby, the soldiers who once joked about the janitor with the 1,000-yard stare now lingered near doors and windows, pretending not to eavesdrop. But they heard enough. He was missing in action, presumed KIA in 1976, during a classified op that no one talks about, not even now. Rick had gone dark, off-grid, under orders that didn't exist on paper. When the rest of his team got pulled out, Rick didn't make it to extraction. And somehow, no one knew how, he'd survived. He didn't come home. Not until now. But the truth was, Rick had been home. He just never wanted the ceremony, the medals, the questions. He found peace in anonymity. A broom and silence were easier than ceremony and ghosts. "Why now?" Colton finally asked. Rick looked toward the base's main gate, where the morning colors had just finished being raised. "Just wanted to be near it again," he said. "You get to a certain point in life and you start wanting to clean the dirt off things." That was all he gave, no explanation of the years, no anger, no regret. Just a man with a broom, guarding the memory of men no one else remembered. The day ended with an unusual command. Rick Benjamin was to be given unrestricted civilian access to the base perimeter, and every young soldier on base would know his name by week's end. Not because he demanded it, because Colton did. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because, deep within the archives of Fort Hawthorne, beneath a layer of dust and redacted files, was the real reason Rick Benjamin never returned. Not a failure, not a betrayal, a sacrifice, and soon someone would try to erase that sacrifice all over again. But Rick Benjamin didn't survive a war just to be swept away like the dust he cleared each morning. And this time, someone else would find out just how wrong they were to underestimate a man with quiet eyes and steady hands. The file had been signed, sealed, and buried deeper than most things ever were, in a locked sub-level of Fort Hawthorne's records annex, where most folders collected dust and disinterest. One thin manila envelope carried no name on the front, just a stamp, faded and half-torn. Operation Hollow Trace, deceased. Except he wasn't. The clerk who found it wasn't supposed to. Second Lieutenant Claire Donovan had only been in her post for 6 weeks. She had orders to digitize legacy documents, most of which were mundane. Motor pool logs, outdated security protocols, weather reports from the ADS. But this file had been misfiled into a transportation report from 1976, and it didn't belong there. She read the first page, then flipped to the second, then stopped breathing entirely at the third. Captain Richard Benjamin, status MIA, presumed KIA. A photo paper clipped to the back showed a younger version of the same man she'd passed a dozen times near the west gate. Same eyes, same posture, same presence that felt like it had carried entire platoons on its back. But it couldn't be. He was dead, the file said so. She printed 3 pages, not to remove the file, she wasn't that reckless, but to verify it. Something was wrong, and the general needed to see it. When she stepped into General Colton's office later that afternoon, she was pale and deliberate. "Sir, I think you need to see this." He took the papers from her with that same calm intensity that made most officers careful with their words. But as his eyes scanned the report, something shifted. His brow furrowed. His jaw set. "This file is restricted. Where did you—" "It was misfiled, sir," she said. "I was sorting the 1976 logistics logs when it fell out." He stared at the photo, the grainy image of a soldier in desert fatigues, holding a map in one hand and a radio in the other. His eyes, even in black and white, were unmistakable. "This file never should have been left in circulation," he muttered. "Sir, if this man is alive, if it's really Captain Benjamin, then we need to do something about—" "No," Colton cut in sharply. "We don't say that name outside this room again. Not until I know who else knows about this." "That's her." "You're dismissed, Lieutenant." She hesitated, but a flick of his eyes sent her moving. As the door shut behind her, Colton placed the pages on his desk, smoothed the edges with both hands, then reached for the secure comms line. His thumb hovered over the button for a full 10 seconds before he pressed it. "Patch me into Pentagon Intel Archives, clearance level 6. Now." Back outside, word was spreading across the base in hushed waves. Soldiers who once laughed at the janitor now offered small nods, not quite salutes, but acknowledgments. He didn't speak to them, not yet. But every so often a group would fall quiet when Rick passed. They'd nudge each other. "That's him," they'd whisper, "from that old black and white photo in the mess hall. The one with Bravo Echo." Some of them had found his name etched into the memorial wall outside the admin center. Richard T. Benjamin, 1948-1976. Beneath the inscription, "Lost during classified engagement. Honor and valor without return." But there he was, sweeping dust. By nightfall, the base felt different, like history had peeled back its skin to reveal something it wasn't ready to let go of. Rick, as usual, didn't care for the stairs. He kept his broom moving in neat arcs, then washed the mop heads by hand in the maintenance shed as he always did. But something in his rhythm had changed. There was a tension now, a waiting, because he knew. He'd seen it in Colton's eyes that morning. The questions were coming, the ones he'd tried to bury. And worse, someone else knew he was alive now. In a small office 2 counties over, a retired analyst named Marvin Greaves adjusted his glasses as the secure terminal on his desk flickered to life. He hadn't been called into a briefing in almost a decade, but when the name Benjamin came across the screen, the past yawned open like an old scar splitting. The message was short. 1 line. Subject resurfaced. General Colton made contact. Orders? Marvin closed the file and unlocked the safe beneath his desk. From it he withdrew a sealed envelope. No return address, just a date. For activation upon Benjamin confirmation. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were coordinates, a contact name, and a directive that made his blood run cold. Contain narrative breach at all costs. Reclassify field agent. Deniability protocol recommended. God help us, Marvin muttered. Back on base, Rick stared up at the barracks lights. The broom rested by his side, forgotten. He knew the old ghost wouldn't stay silent forever. When he first returned, 10 years after he was lost, he didn't come to the base. He wandered. Small towns, church basements, farms where nobody asked for names, and he kept his head down. But eventually, he came back here, not because of the army, because of the flag, because something in him needed to see it rise each morning and know that what he did meant something. But if they were opening those files again, it wasn't just about memory. It meant someone was scared. Rick walked back to his quarters, just a cot in a supply room he never asked to be cleared. He sat down on the edge of the bed and reached into a metal toolbox beneath it. He pulled out a box. Inside were 6 small items, a medal still in its case, a set of dog tags with the chain broken, a photo of 6 men in dusty gear smiling in front of a chopper, a tattered shoulder patch from Bravo Echo, a rusted compass, and 1 torn letter, addressed only to Rick. If you make it out. He placed the photo on the bunk beside him. Didn't expect this day to come, he whispered. But it had. And if they were coming for him again, this time he wouldn't just disappear. Not without telling the truth. Not without cleaning the dust off everything they tried to bury. General Colton stood alone in his office, staring through the reinforced glass window that overlooked the parade field. The flag fluttered in the wind, strong, proud, eternal. But his thoughts weren't on the present. They were in the desert. Dust, blood, radio static. A mission that wasn't supposed to exist. He knew the order would come soon. Not from above, not officially. The kind of orders that lived between words, hidden in protocol loopholes, phrased with just enough ambiguity to absolve everyone of guilt while ensuring someone disappeared quietly. Again, a knock broke his trance. Colonel Dana Sheffield stepped in, crisp and efficient, tablet in hand. You asked for the morning updates, sir. Colton didn't turn. Any unusual reports overnight? Not officially, but chatter's spreading among the junior enlisted ranks about the janitor. Some of the sergeants say morale's changing. Not in a bad way, just different. Colton turned, now, eyes sharp. You mean they're starting to believe in ghosts, sir? Colton sighed, waved the comment away. Never mind. Make sure no one harasses Mr. Benjamin. He's to be left alone until further notice. Sheffield nodded, but hesitated. Permission to speak freely, sir? Why is a civilian janitor listed as restricted access in the visitor registry? And why is his file locked behind clearance levels we don't even have on this base? Colton studied her. Not with suspicion, but with the weight of deciding just how much she needed to know. Because once, long before you made major, he said slowly, That man walked into a village no one was supposed to know existed, radioed coordinates no one would acknowledge, and saved the lives of 24 American soldiers, myself included. Sheffield's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. "We were overrun," Colton continued. "Intel screwed us. We landed on bad coordinates, hostiles everywhere. Extraction point got compromised. The op was classified so deep we didn't even get medevac approval. We were ghosts the second our boots hit dirt, and Rick, Captain Benjamin, volunteered to stay behind and draw enemy fire." He paused, swallowing the memory like a shard of glass, and watched the smoke from 5 clicks out and assumed he'd died. Command confirmed KIA, medal citation drafted, ceremony held in his absence, but no body and no closure. Sheffield blinked, and he just came back? 10 years later. No explanation, just appeared one day at a contractor checkpoint, denied everything, refused debrief, said he wanted to disappear. So why now? Colton turned back to the window. "That's the part I can't answer." In the shed behind the east utility corridor, Rick waited. He sat in a metal folding chair, the mop bucket beside him dry, wheels locked. The only sound was the occasional creak of old pipes overhead and the distant echo of cadence drills from the courtyard. He was thinking of Meyer, Private First Class Danny Meyer, 19 years old, freckles across his nose, nervous hands but a steady aim. The kid had memorized every protocol, called Rick Sir even after 2 weeks in the field, and wrote letters to his mother every night, even when there wasn't mail pickup. He was one of the 24, and one of the 3 who didn't make it out. Rick kept that photo of Meyer tucked behind the others in the box, not because he wanted to hide him, but because he didn't want to forget how much it cost. He'd told himself staying away was the right choice, for Meyer's family, for the unit, for the country, but the silence hadn't given peace, it had just spread like mold. Now something was shifting. Files were being opened. People were watching him again. The kind of people who knew what the words "contain narrative breach" really meant. He pulled the compass from the box, turned it over in his hands. On the back, scratched into the metal, were the initials LTK. Lieutenant Travis Kemp. The first man Rick ever followed into a firefight. The man who died in his arms, whispering, "Don't let them forget." Rick hadn't let himself forget, and now maybe it was time no one else did either. Claire Donovan couldn't sleep. She stared at the photocopies she'd made, laid out across her small bunk like puzzle pieces that refused to fit together. She'd read every line twice. The coordinates, the mission logs, the blacked-out lines that made her skin crawl. But the thing that haunted her most was the single red stamp on the final page. Subject terminated, Opal hollow trace, no recovery. But he wasn't terminated. He was sweeping concrete and mopping cafeteria floors. She needed answers, not from General Colton, from him. She waited until reveille had passed and the base had settled into its daily rhythm. Then she walked across the quad, past the rec center, and down toward the perimeter sheds, where the civilians stored their gear. She found Rick sitting outside the shed, elbows on knees, staring at nothing in particular. "You really were Bravo Echo," she said, quietly. He didn't look up. "I don't wear the patch anymore. You don't have to. The way you walk says more than any insignia." He gave the faintest grunt, half laugh, half sigh. "They teaching poetic flattery in the lieutenant course now?" She stepped closer, holding the pages. These were buried. "You were buried." His eyes flicked to the papers, then to her. "And you thought it was your job to dig them up?" "I thought it was my duty not to let history lie to itself." Rick stood slowly, his back cracked once. "Then come inside, and I'll tell you the part that didn't make the file." It took 37 minutes for Rick to tell her the unclassified version, how the mission went sideways, how he volunteered to stay back, how the only way to keep the hostiles off the extraction was to use a decoy beacon in an old detonation sequence rigged to make the signal look like a downed transport. He watched the others escape, saw the chopper lift over the ridge. Then he ran for 6 days, through sand and sun and silence, no food, barely water, 1 shot left in his rifle and a knife dulled from cutting radio wire, until he found a UN convoy and collapsed near their tires. "They thought I was dead," he said simply, "so I let them keep thinking that." "Why?" Claire asked. Rick looked at her, steady. "Because sometimes, when you survive, you don't want to be found. Because if you are, someone's going to ask why it was you and not the ones you left behind." She didn't reply, and for the first time he looked tired. Not old, tired. "But it wasn't just guilt," she said. "No," Rick admitted. "It was also fear. Not for me, for them. Because if someone found out what really happened that day, what we really found buried in that valley, it wouldn't just end with a folded flag and a headline. It would rewrite everything." Claire stared. "What did you find?" Rick turned to the window, and for the first time since returning, he whispered the one word he'd buried deeper than all the others. "Proof." Rick sat beside Claire, the air in the shed thick with memory. The word hung between them. Proof. Not shouted, not pushed, just offered like a match waiting to be struck. But Claire didn't ask the next question, not yet. She understood now that the man beside her didn't move quickly, not in speech, not in emotion, not in regret. He moved like a man who'd had to survive by not drawing too much attention. Rick reached beneath the cot and slid the box out again, unlocking it with a rusted key tied to his bootlace. From beneath the old photos and medals, he pulled a weathered plastic sleeve containing a cracked Polaroid and a faded microcassette. The photo was crooked, the lighting poor, but clear enough. A group of foreign operatives, men in tactical gear with no insignias, standing around an open container. Inside it, no one would believe it without seeing, were documents, stamped with U.S. seals. Satellite schematics, oil field contracts, names, dates. A trade that was never meant to happen, made in silence during the Cold War between factions that didn't officially exist. Rick slid the microcassette into a small recorder. "You won't understand the language," he said. "But the voices, that second one, that's an American general, alive and well. He sold us out." He pressed play. The tape hissed. Then voices emerged. Rough, clipped, foreign. Then clearer, an English voice, calm, authoritative, bargaining. Claire leaned forward, mouth parting. Rick clipped it off. "No one wanted this to surface," he said. "That op was never about recovery. It was a cover, to bury a deal and me with it." Claire's hands trembled slightly. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" He looked her dead in the eyes. "Because you don't win against ghosts, you let them fade." "But you didn't fade," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I got tired of hiding." It was enough. She knew it was time. General Colton stood before the command review board in Washington. The documents Rick provided encrypted on a secure flash drive, delivered by Claire with his full authorization. The board didn't speak during the footage. They didn't blink much either. It took 12 minutes for them to reach consensus. The name Richard T. Benjamin was to be officially reinstated into the Army personnel log, not as deceased, but as survivor, critical asset, status resolved. His military honors were to be updated. He would be formally retired with the rank of captain, and he would be offered full back pay and benefits. But most importantly, he would be recognized. The ceremony wasn't grand. That wasn't his style. They held it at Fort Hawthorne in the open air near the same west gate he had swept each morning. An honor guard stood in full dress. A dozen chairs were set for invited guests, though hundreds came. Soldiers in formation stood on the field behind. Civilians from the nearby town filled the grass. Some brought small American flags, some just brought tears. General Colton took the podium. His voice cracked once, but never faltered. "I speak today not just as a general, but as a soldier who owes his life to another. Captain Richard Benjamin saved my team in 1976. We believed him dead. But he was here. He stayed quiet. He stayed humble. And today we honor him for a lifetime of service, seen and unseen." The crowd rose in applause as Rick was called forward. He stepped up in his same faded work boots and simple slacks, no uniform, but he stood tall. He took the mic briefly, looking out over faces young and old. "I've been called many things," he said quietly. "Soldier, ghost, janitor, but today I'll answer to one I never expected again. Brother. That's all I ever wanted to be remembered as." And with that, the flag, once raised each morning without acknowledgment, was lowered and handed to him, not in mourning but in tribute. Rick accepted it with steady hands, then turned and raised it again himself. The honor had been granted by the board. From this day forward, Rick Benjamin would raise the colors every morning at Fort Hawthorne. Private Kyle Jennings, the same one who once mocked Rick behind his back, now stood post as flag detail. He hadn't spoken a word to Rick since the ceremony, until one early morning when Rick found him standing alone at the flagpole. "You come to watch or help?" Rick asked. Kyle turned, clearing his throat. "Permission to assist, sir." Rick smirked. "I'm not a sir anymore." "You are to me." Rick handed him the flag. Kyle didn't drop it. Weeks passed, then months. The base changed. Protocols were updated regarding missing in action soldiers. A new wall was installed beside the memorial, engraved with a single line, "To those who were never forgotten, only hidden." Rick never left. He didn't want to. He still swept in the mornings, not because he had to, but because it calmed him. Soldiers passed now and greeted him by name. Some saluted. Some just nodded, eyes full of quiet respect. One afternoon, Claire approached with a new folder. "You've been requested," she said. Rick raised an eyebrow. "The Army Historical Division wants you to speak. Share the real version. Archive it." Rick glanced toward the parade field. "Not sure they're ready for it," he said. "They want your truth." Rick chuckled. "Well then, guess I better shave." That evening, Rick sat in his shed, watching the sunset pour molten gold across the concrete. He pulled the photo of Bravo Echo from his box. "They know now," he whispered to the faces frozen in time. "We made it home." He closed the box, stood, and opened the door to the warm night. The base was quiet, not silent, alive, in the way peace always sounds when it's earned. Rick stepped into the fading light, not as a ghost anymore, but as a man finally seen. And this time, he wasn't sweeping the dust away. He was walking through it, leaving footprints behind.